So we will take up the second half of the program, beginning with Dr. Gary Ivey. Dr. Ivey has worked with wildlife for over 35 years, concentrating his work on waterbirds, waterfowl, and wetland conservation in the western U.S. He served as a biologist at several Western National Wildlife Refuges for 18 years and has worked for the International Crane Foundation since 2007, serving as their lead for sandhill crane conservation and research in Western North America. He studied wintering ecology of sandhill cranes in the agricultural landscape of California, as he mentioned, for his PhD through Oregon State University. And Gary also serves on the board of the Trumpeter Swan Society and is their lead on Oregon's Trumpeter Swan Restoration Project and the Rocky Mountain population. Without any further ado, Dr. Ivey.
Thank you. This is a complicated issue, isn't it? You know, people got these birds in trouble as we settled across Canada and across the U.S. They were down to almost extinction level, and they're coming back. They're doing pretty well. Okay, I don't talk about the Swan Society's mission. You know, we're a conservation organization focused on a single species, and we've been in existence since 1968, working with most of the restoration projects around the state. Most of the scientists and biologists that have worked with trumpeter swans have been members of our society. I wanted to read our mission. The mission is to assure the vitality and welfare of wild trumpeter swan populations in North America. And our values, we believe that the restoration, conservation, and security of trumpeter swans in North America are very important for the intrinsic value of the species, for its role in natural systems, and for the inspiration and beauty that the swan brings to human existence. The Swan Society also values trumpeter swans as a symbol of hope for the restoration of imperiled species, as a high-profile ambassador for the conservation of North American wetlands. So restoring trumpeter swans really means saving habitat at some level, and that takes care of a lot of other species that kind of cascade below the swans and use that same habitat. Some of them may not be very welcome sometimes, like these white geese, but anyway, my translation of this is we're really talking about maintaining healthy trumpeter swan populations so for future generations, so your great-great-grandchildren can have them in their lives and enjoy them and experience them. So, there's some major threats to trumpeter swans, and the major threat that I think is probably more important than these mortality issues is habitat loss. You know, we've lost a lot of wetlands to drainage and development. Most of that happened in the last century, but we still have issues with global warming, which is contributing to sea level rise, which are threatening some important key swan habitats. And another big issue with habitat loss, because these birds that we talked about are using these agricultural landscapes, is loss of waterfowl compatible agriculture. And it's grain fields, it's green crops, it's things that are really attractive and provide a lot of fast energy and easy foraging, mostly for waterfowl, but they also support a wide range of other species, from small mammals and raptors and all kinds of animals, including elk, which may not be welcome either. But we also deal with issues that aren't population threatening, but they're some chronic problems with lead poisoning, as you probably well know here in the Whatcom County, Judson Lake area, spanning across the border into BC. We've lost a lot of birds in the last 15 years. And it's still ongoing. There's issues with power lines and development, and illegal shootings is another problem. I just wanted to summarize some quick key points here to consider. If you weren't at our symposium today, we heard that the population of adult white trumpeters for the Pacific Coast population is about 25,000. They're doing much better than this group was down to some number around maybe 2,000 back in 1968, probably much lower than that back in the 20s and 30s. A real important point is that this population, a large percentage of them winter here in the Northwest Washington, Southwest BC area, basically here in your backyard, in Skagit, Whatcom County, and other counties in Northwest Washington. But there's very few south of Washington, very few south of Seattle. There's a few in Oregon that are from this population, but very, very few. It's a huge percentage of the population depend on this landscape. And particularly in this landscape, they're particularly dependent on dairy crops. We've been talking around that. Coastal wetlands and other wetlands are kind of a secondary importance to the population. And we heard from Jay Gordon, our last speaker today, that 90% of the dairies in Western Washington are gone already. There's about 120 dairies left. As we've heard some other speakers, the conversion to berry crops, urbanization, in Washington at least, restoration habitat for salmon's wiped out some areas. And that, as Jay said, is an endangered species. It's the dairy industry. These swans depend on the dairies, and if we don't save the dairies, we're probably going to lose a lot of the swans. And how many swans can we support if we don't have the dairies? So this is a major future threat to their viability. Continued loss of habitat could reduce the carrying capacity. These birds need food, and if you have too many birds and not enough food, that means a bunch of them starve. The carrying capacity is the limit, some minimum during their life cycle of the year that limits the population. And if we get down to a level where there's half as much dairy food, can we support 25,000 swans? We don't know, but I would suspect there would be some population decline. These birds, their behavior makes it complicated also. They are very traditional. I work with cranes, I work with swans, and they're very similar. They family-oriented. The young stay with their parents for a year, almost a year, before they get kicked out during the nesting season. And they learn their migration routes from their parents, and they're very loyal to their winter sites that they learn from their parents, and it's very hard for them to make a major shift to some place like the lower Columbia River around Portland, Oregon, or to the Central Valley in California. It's very difficult because they don't know that landscape's out there. These birds historically knew the whole Pacific Flyway landscape. They were up and down the coast, up and down the Willamette Valley in Oregon and Central Valley in California, and they don't have that in their, what I call the flock memory anymore. Very few birds are pioneering new spots, so that makes it more critical that we focus on this site. So I've come up with this term, which I don't know if you'll like that, but we believe this issue is urgent. We need to address it sooner than later to conserve dairies, and the solution is to protect and conserve the swanscape. And I think what we would like to do is and I take a step back. I'm impressed with all the work you guys have done in Canada. I'm the token American on this panel, but I'm very impressed with all the progress you've made and what you're doing here. I don't think, and I know about the issues in Northwest Washington. I learned a lot from Martha over the years and other partners. I've worked on the lead issue a little bit. But I think that Washington has a little way to go to catch up with you. And I'm suggesting that we partner up internationally, learn from each other, and develop a coalition to save the swanscape and focus on preserving dairies. So this international partnership, develop an initiative like a joint venture project, and if we can get the joint venture to adopt this as a priority, which might be a little challenging, but if we can't, we should still try to partner up and develop this coalition to save this swanscape. Some key tasks, which some of this is already being done in Canada and a little bit in the States. Identify strategic landscapes for conservation, mapping compatible agricultural areas and their associated roost sites, and rate them in importance to the swans, develop a minimum population estimate. And another thing, Bruce Conant asked about, can we put a bunch of food plots out there and take care of these birds and get rid of these ag problems? We need to kind of I suggest we should do an energetics analysis to kind of estimate how much energy this flock needs to maintain itself. And when you do that, they did this for the Central Valley Joint Venture in California for the waterfowl down there. They figured out how much food did these ducks need, and they had objectives for ducks, and they knew how much different species of ducks ate, and they came up with this big model and estimated how much energy, and therefore they could go back to the landscape and say, we could identify habitat goals and objectives. So I think maybe some process like that would be very useful here, and there's lots of data sets. The waterfowl surveys that Martha's done and the states have done in BC folks have done, the eBird data. There's all kinds of information we could use to identify this stuff. So getting back to this coalition, I just listed some major partners here potentially on some ideas, and this is just me brainstorming. But Pacific Birds joint venture, Washington Fish and Wildlife Service, Canadian Wildlife Service, BC Wildlife Branch Land Trust. I didn't mention DU and those other partners, but conservation organizations. I threw in here Salinas Marsh to make it personal, but many others. I mean, a lot of the partners that you guys are working with would hopefully be partners in this. And key partners are agricultural interests such as the Washington State Dairy Federation, American Farmland Trust. There's farmland trust type groups here in BC, and just kind of identify those partners and figure out a way to start building support for dairies to keep them in business. Some other considerations, make sure there are no losers. We need to address the issues on these farms as best we can and take care of our farmers so they can stay in business. We need to figure out ways to help them. Develop incentives for waterfowl compatible crops. You have some of that already here in BC. The states don't have very good programs for paying for crop damage. It's pretty poor. I'm working on cranes in California. One thing we've been talking about and I've been kind of pushing is how do we make sandhill cranes or trumpeter swans a paying crop for farmers? So we end up coming up with a way to pay farmers by the number of swans their land supports. And I think that's something we should seriously consider. And you know, the bird watching community could hopefully support that because they're getting the enjoyment out of that. So the last thing I put here is, and also, before I skip that, we need to help deal with these management issues, help solve the problems with waterfowl depredations, and also other management issues like dealing with deaths from lead and power lines, and have this big partnership to kind of work on these issues. And then also focus on connecting communities and ecotourism opportunities so that we have viable small communities around these swan landscapes that can bring money into the community and help support the system. So, get kids outdoors. So I just threw up some major grants available in the U.S. on this last slide, and one of them is this, NRCS has this Conservation Innovation Grants Program, which are up to $2 million. They kind of are landscape level partnerships to focus on some wildlife or resource problem. I think there's potential to identify that here and make it an international program. Of course, most of you know about the Wetlands NACA grant program, North American Wetlands Conservation Act grant. I think there could be several NACA grants here that focus on the ag landscape with easements and so forth. And in Washington, they've got grants for up to $1 million for habitat conservation and restoration, which we might be able to tap into. There's a lot of other grant sources and funding sources you guys mentioned, and there's a lot more in the States, and the partners can help identify those. But the other funding source is you, and when I say you, I mean the members of the Swan Society, the members of your organizations, the public. And so that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gary. Way to kick it off with a challenge to the panel and the people to put their partnerships and their funds where their values are. Our next speaker is Derek Masselink. Derek is one of the newest members of the regional agrologists team that work with the BC Ministry of Agriculture. He works out of the Duncan office and provides frontline service to southern Vancouver Island and the southern Gulf Islands. Derek has a background in wildlife ecology, landscape architecture, and agroecology, and has worked in a wide variety of areas, including protected areas planning and management, wildlife management, First Nations and treaty negotiation, landscape planning, farm design, post-secondary education, community development, and politics. Derek is on the panel representing an expert in complex problems. Derek.
So I want to thank the organizers for inviting me. I'm a bit of the odd duck in this panel, and sort of desperate for a laugh. But I'm as was mentioned, I'm new to the ministry. I'm new to this area. I've literally been in the job for a couple of months, and been spending quite a bit of time meeting with producer groups, with community organizations, with municipalities. And what I'm hearing from up and down the South Island is a concern about wildlife. Wildlife, waterfowl, in particular geese, resident geese populations are an increasing concern for producer groups as well as for municipalities and regional districts that are dealing with the impacts. I'm also hearing about elk and deer as part of this because farmers often bear the brunt of the impacts of our concerted efforts to bring back these populations, and because of, as I think was mentioned by the panel, kind of development pressures have basically the areas that are available to these populations are farms and parks. So our ministry is very aware of the situation, and as you also know, and I'm sure the farmers in the crowd understand, is that our ministry is not responsible. It doesn't have any jurisdictional responsibility for wildlife, and it's a bit disappointing that my counterparts can't be a part of this discussion, because I think it's a valuable discussion to be part of, and they need to hear and also need to be part of, I think, this figuring out how do we achieve some sort of a balance so that we both protect and maintain these populations, but also balance it with the competing uses and needs of people in the agricultural community. So that's really what this is one of the roles that I have as a frontline ministry staff person, is to try to facilitate these discussions so that there is a consideration of the needs of producer groups, so that their interests and livelihood is considered as we try to bring back these impacted populations. So I'm here to basically introduce myself and to listen and to meet many of you because this is going to be an ongoing conversation and something that our ministry is very much interested in participating and contributing in a positive manner. Thank you.
So, we've heard from Gary Ivey and his idea on international partnerships and speaking for the Swans. We've heard from Derek in his facilitation role. And now we get our closer for the evening, Graham Fowler. Graham has been working with Trumpeter Swans for over 25 years through the Cowichan Valley Waterfowl Management Project. Over the past decade, Graham has expanded the scope of his wildlife agriculture consulting business to address other wildlife species that negatively impact farms on Vancouver Island, like elk. Graham also administers and delivers the BC Provincial Agriculture Wildlife Compensation Program to Vancouver Island farmers on behalf of the BC Ministry of Agriculture. This program compensates farmers for wildlife damage to harvestable yields of forages grown as livestock feed. Welcome, Graham, as he shares his perspective from both sides of the fence and kicks us off for another round of discussion.
Well, thank you. As you see, I wear a few different hats. I started originally in a similar program that Christine was working on now, and I started with her predecessor three maybe ago, Teresa, 25 years ago, and we did a lot of the same things that she showcased in her presentation with the cover crops and palatability studies on varieties and growth habits and all of those things. Fortunately, she's got the budget, and unfortunately, I don't, for the cover cropping aspect through Ducks Unlimited. But we are still working together on that sort of thing, and the Provincial Wildlife Compensation Program has finally started to reimburse farmers for cover crops. And that is provincially now offered. These are my cows. This is how I now have a view from both sides of the fence on the issue. I lease a farm in the Comox Valley. It's 30 to 35 acres right next to the estuary. That's the Comox estuary. My farm is the dark strip just to the right. Then we have the estuary, the Courtenay River, and there's about 800 acres of agricultural land from my dark strip up towards the other end, which is a large farm owned by Ducks Unlimited. And they've just newly acquired another piece in the middle. So Ducks Unlimited is purchasing land all along the riverfront there. And much like the Cowichan Valley, the Vancouver Island landscape is a mix of agriculture, estuary, foreshore, mountains, timber, and now urban development. All have pressures on farmland. So in our area up in Comox, this is a typical farm size. The center farm is about 100 to 150 acres, and that would be the average farm size. Maybe down in Cowichan Valley, it's a little smaller and more diverse in what they produce, but we still have dairy farms and some large dairy farms down in Cowichan. And predominantly on Vancouver Island, most of the agricultural crop is forage-based for livestock feed, whether it's for beef cattle, dairy cattle, sheep, or horses. Vancouver Island is seasonably wet in the winter and very dry in the summer in this East Coast banana belt, they call it, from Victoria to roughly Campbell River. So you can see the fields have a wet mosaic that are attractive to waterfowl. This is a dairy farm in Comox, and this is in the dry condition. If waterfowl were to inhabit this farm at this time, the impacts would be very little. Deer impacts, elk impacts, when the farm is in this condition, are minimal. Yes, you lose yield, but there's no long-term negative effect. Trumpeter swans arrive on Vancouver Island about the third week of October in the Courtenay area. And I'm just finding out that it's not till roughly December in Cowichan. I've heard we have 2 down here, so we'll go see if we can find them on the bus tour. So when the swans first arrive, they head to the vegetable fields where there's waste product left behind, whether it's corn, potatoes, carrots, even pumpkins they'll eat. So here they're actually helping the farmers by consuming waste product, reducing disease, pest, and volunteer crops from sprouting. There's no damage compensation paid out to vegetable farmers for birds utilizing their fields. These cull potatoes are deemed culls on the grading line, and many of the producers will dump them out into the fields if they don't make grade for market. There is another market for them, and that's for feeding livestock. So some of the vegetable farmers will sell them to beef producers. But if they don't, the swans are quite happy to consume them. These are a little different than the pictures we were watching all day of swans in beautiful marshes. I'm showing you dirty pictures. The Canada geese and the greater white-fronted geese visit our valley up in Comox as well, and here they're feeding on a harvested barley field. We have transient flocks of widgeon. roughly 5,000 widgeon can come into a farm overnight and consume a lot of grass crop. So we're happy that they're transient and we don't see them every year in these numbers. The swans and the geese and the ducks all utilize the grass fields after all the vegetables are consumed, the waste vegetables. They have palatability preferences. They like all the same things that cows like. If a cow milks good on it, the swans will like it. If the cow will leave it in the field when grazing as the last choice, so will the swan. So here you can see some swans showing up in the wet areas of the field. Not too many at all in the drier points. So this is a typical field in winter condition. Here's my farm again. Unfortunately, I have a creek that goes through the farm, and the original farmer buried the creek in a pipe and made one nice big field, which is great for haying. But when the flood comes, the creek comes over top, and so do the waterfowl. This is more than just yield reduction. I think we have heard from the farmers that it's not so bad. They can tolerate a few swans. They can tolerate a few deer, elk, geese. It's when it gets to a level that's not tolerated, not tolerable anymore. Not many of us want to lose more than 10% of our earnings a year. In my job of compensating farmers, I'll look at this area and try and determine what kind of yield loss is there. And does this yield loss affect more than one cut? We get up to 5 cuts of forage in a season. So if there's root damage or plant removal, then it's obviously impacting more than first cut. I'm going to get really boring with you guys because my job is kind of boring looking at this all the time. 10,000 acres I walk looking at this. It's just math, trying to figure out how much yield reduction. If you look at plant density, what is the potential? And then what's in here for plant density compared to up here? And this was all removed by waterfowl. So would you say 50% of the plants are gone? 60%? Do I hear 80%? Anybody? Okay, come on, crowd participation. Good, I don't have to come up with the right answer. I do that every day. How much of the field is missing? How much of the crop is missing? It's not easy to determine. So the right answer was somewhere between 60 and 80. Or at least my answer, maybe not the right answer. 50 swans on my farm is different than 50 swans on Oliver's farm. 50 swans on my farm don't do the same amount of damage or the level of damage to my farm as they do on Oliver's farm. Oliver, what type of soil do you have? Hey, this is a peat field. Do you see any of your holes like this in your field? Hey? Yes, I don't. So these holes are caused by foraging trumpeter swans. Earlier today, there was a question, what's the difference, or do you notice a difference between swans foraging on the fields and snow geese? And my answer is yes. Snow geese don't do this. Trumpeter swans are very hard on their own habitat. They require large areas of habitat to raise their young because they are so hard on it. It takes quite a bit of time and rejuvenation to happen in those marshes that they're breeding on. So they need a large expanse. Unfortunately, the same goes on farmland. They're very hard on the landscape. And peat soils, when flooded, are very soft, and the plants can easily be ripped out, and trumpeter swans like to feed on the roots of the plants. When the water goes away, you're left with craters. And that's more of a mineral field, not a peat field. And so when they get into that activity in the flooded condition, they can cause a lot of damage. So this is, again, this is more than yield loss. This is more than impacting first cut or first harvest. The farmer has to go out there and do something about this before he'll get another crop. I wouldn't want to have to deal with that. Any guesses on yield reduction?
80, 90?
Yeah, 80 plus. That's a 110-acre field. We value forage production in 3 categories on Vancouver Island: low, medium, and high. Farmers, can you plug your ears, please? Low yield is 1.5 tons to the acre. Medium yield, 2 tons to the acre. These are dry tons. And high yielding crop is 2.5 tons to the acre. Low, low, low. This is a compensation program, insurance program. So the yields are probably higher, but to even the playing field, those are the yields we use. So part of my job when I walk on the farm is to assess, is this a high yielding field, medium, or low? Then I attribute yield potential. Was it going to reach that without waterfowl pressure or wildlife? And then I calculate what the yield reduction is after that. And in these situations where there's plant removal, it goes into the second cut or third cut. So it's paid out at a higher rate than just leaf matter removal. This is all waterfowl damage. We haven't seen any elk damage yet. So unfortunately, Derek, I'm the antithesis of you. I've been at this for far too long. I've been here for far too long. Originally, when the Swans came, when I was hired in 1990, trumpeter swans were very leery of agriculture producers. They were afraid of predators. They would not roost in the fields overnight. They would always return to estuaries or marshes, ponds, for the safety from predators. Not anymore. Roosting poop. Roosting poop, roosting poop, roosting poop. Little bit of water, not really going to afford many swans safety from a dog or a wolf. So this means that the swans are roosting in this field all night long. So in other words, they're available to feed on this field 24/7. That's different 25 years later than it was 25 years ago. So one of the things for our Vancouver Island farmers is our land prices are exceptionally high as compared to the prairies or maybe some of the United States. I'll say a number, it's probably conservative in some areas and maybe excessive in others, but anywhere from 15 to 25,000 an acre for just a grass field. If it has irrigation, can be upwards of that. And if it's on the lower mainland, it's obviously much more than that. So it's not easy for farmers to go out and purchase lots more land. So if the waterfowl come in and start doing this to a field, he can't just go out and grow more field by buying more land. He has to buy replacement feed. And the birds keep coming. And they keep eating. So before the compensation program came about, my job, like Christine's, was to try and help the farmer help themselves. Try and figure out what the farmer could do to minimize the impacts of overwintering waterfowl and wildlife on their farms to remain productive and viable. So here we have one of Christine's exclosures, and here we have feeding waterfowl. Doesn't take very long, and you notice what the difference inside versus outside is. So that's just impacting first cut. There's not any plant removal, no bare soil. So that would be deemed about a 40% yield reduction if they consume all the grass leaf without impacting the root system. So that's kind of tolerable for the farmers. It's not great, but it's not making them go back out into the field and reseed anything or do any extra activity. That crop will come back. Not as high yielding as it would have been without the swans, but it will come back. So mitigation for us in the early days was dogs, border collies. I had a few of them and they were fantastic. But as the swan population grew, I couldn't keep up with chasing all the birds. And that was a big part of my job in the early days. We also used guns, just scare guns, noise-making guns. But in urban settings like this, it's kind of frowned upon. I got tired of being written up in the local paper. Who's that guy chasing the swans? Why has he got the dogs? Not allowed to shoot off firearms in city limits, those sort of things. So we tried to come up with some static devices. These are just flags placed out in the field. Recommended 1 per acre. And they work for a little while. You can see the swans in the background. There's a cover crop back there. This is a perennial forage field with some flags, some birds flying over. But they lose their effectiveness. But it is still a little green right here, but not so much around. So it takes about 2 weeks for the birds to realize that's not a predator, and then they have at it. So we need to find some other way to minimize the damage and impacts to the perennial forages. So these are relay crops being planted in amongst a corn crop. So annual ryegrass, it could be oats or barley or any other crop that the farmer chooses, but palatability-wise, trumpeter swans love perennial or annual ryegrass. So that's what's going in. We have a Ducks Unlimited sign showing people that this is a crop specifically planted for waterfowl. And they work great, as long as they're more productive than the surrounding hayfields. And that's not easy to guarantee given our weather patterns. Corn came off October this year, kind of late. The rains came the day after that. Yeah. So unless you planted a cover crop in relay, you weren't going to get much of an opportunity to plant a cover crop. So even if we were reimbursing or had the opportunity, weather doesn't always allow us to achieve success. But when we do have success, the birds definitely utilize them. And other wildlife like elk or deer. And so much so that they consume it all, except for what's under the exclosure. So significant volume loss. And that's what they do to the hayfields. That cedar was a 4-row cedar, and it takes a long time to plant 190 acres at 4 rows at a time. So now that farm equipment's getting bigger in our area, as our fields are getting bigger and our dairies are getting bigger, we can now plant 60 feet at a time. This is a fertilizer spreader, but we throw ryegrass seed into it and use it to spread over top of the corn. Another type of mitigation is drainage to try and stop the ponding or surface water accumulations on the perennial forage fields. And this is an aerator that's passed over, and it helps with that surface sealing and compaction issue as well. And then, of course, the best of all is field drainage, subsurface drain tiling. I'm not sure what the estimate would be now, probably $3,000 or $4,000 an acre to do that, somewhere in there, if you can get the guy to come over from the mainland to do it. So agriculture on Vancouver Island is up against the wall on many different fronts. We have a relatively short growing season. They are coming up with great corn varieties that are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. But by the time the farmer gets out there and preps the field, lets the crop grow, spreads his manure, cuts his 5 yields of crop of hay, then goes out back into the corn for harvest, there's not a lot of extra time. All the while, bears are in his barley, bears are in his corn, geese are in a cover crop, or worse, geese are in his corn, pulling his corn out. Any idea on loss there? The ones that are missing is 100% loss. Yes. They're not coming back, something like that. When the geese get in there early, they do a great job at pulling it all out. One goose easily can consume an acre of corn a day. Easy. One goose. Oh, don't forget about the deer. Or the elk. Corn yield. The cob is 50% of the yield of that corn plant. The stover or stalk is the other 50%. So those 2 elk bites, any idea on yield reduction? If the whole cob was gone, that would be 50% yield reduction. See any cobs? Maybe one. Yeah, they're still green. The elk are coming back. Farmers are busy doing their farming thing, and now we're asking them to put up elk fencing. They usually already have some type of fencing, but now we have to ask them to do this. This fence cost $70,000. Keeps the elk out, and he's got some electricity there to keep the bears out too. Electric wire there, and one here. Compensation helps with that fence, 50% reimbursement. We do not compensate for stack yards, so the farmer has to fence a stack yard on his own. We don't help. Elk in his field. It's not great through the winter to have elk in your field. Looks like a rototiller went through. So the farmer's growing these crops to feed his cows or my cows. Those cows are feeding their cows. We've got the equipment to harvest the crop. We just need the crop. That's a pretty picture. Even if you're a farmer, that's not so bad. This one gets a little harder to take. But we have compensation. But it doesn't feed our cows.
Thanks so much, Graham. And we've talked about the importance of preserving dairies and other agricultural landscapes. And I think that Graham, you definitely highlighted some of the challenges and gave us a very visceral sense of what's going on the landscape for the farmers. Our question, and I'm just going to put this to the panel to start it off, is what are the options for conservation and agriculture in the Cowichan Valley? Are there currently initiatives underway that are bringing farmers and conservation groups together to address this? And is a model like the Delta Farmland and Wildlife Trust a replicable model for other regions in British Columbia?
I just finished.
The voice of experience.
Yes, so in the Comox Valley, we pioneered, Christine's group there, we pioneered cover crops. We helped reimburse cover crop initiatives with farmers. We trialed drainage initiatives and found out palatability of grass species for swans, helped the farmer identify plant fescues if you don't want waterfowl. But it's all about what's still around there and what is better food quality out there and what's available. So unfortunately, if you're growing the highest protein grass in your area, you're going to have the birds. The estuaries are depleted. They are trying to reestablish those areas, but it's agriculture that is sustaining the population. And no matter what we do to try and help the farmer needs the yield. And the dollar value that we are paying as either insurance program or a compensation program is only 80% of the projected value that he's lost. So as conservation organizations, we need to address the population numbers, address how and where those birds go with our land acquisitions or making the natural areas better. But the farmers need the crop. So that's really where our focus needs to lie, is how do we allow the farmer to get his crop?
Christine?
The model of the Delta Farmland and Wildlife Trust certainly was always intended to be replicated in other areas, recognizing that each agricultural region has challenges. Some of these challenges are very distinct to a region. So the cover crop program that we administer with the Delta farmers may not be applicable in another province, for example. And one of the things that our organization really tries to implement is we aren't static. Our programs are not static. They are always evolving to meet, hopefully, the needs of the farming community as well as the wildlife conservation needs that emerge. And these are conversations that we have with farmers at our board table. What do you need to make farming more viable? Because we recognize, I even read in a Canadian Wildlife Service technical report that agricultural land is the single largest terrestrial habitat for wildlife. So what do we need to keep agriculture viable, recognizing that it's important to provide this type of habitat? And there's many different things that Delta will need moving forward into the future, and our stewardship programs will have to address those emerging needs. So our model has worked in Delta. There's still a lot of challenges that need to be addressed, and we need to be able to adapt as a community to address them. And I think that's the same for every agriculture community, rather it's here in BC or across Canada.
Oliver, you're a director with the Cowichan Agricultural Society. What do you think the capacity of the Agricultural Society here would be to respond or to participate in an initiative like they have in Delta?
Oh, well, we really don't have any, it'd just be farmer to farmer. We don't have any staff per se. So we'd have to have a sizable government grant, I guess, to get that started. CAS was running the fencing program for a while, but it got taken away. We were paying fencing at 100% apparently, but it got taken away, I don't know how many years ago. Graham may know, but quite a few years ago. So now the fencing, Graham says it's 50%? Is that what you said? Yeah. So but when it was administered by CAS, it was 100%. So.
Tom, did I see you reaching for the microphone?
I think the challenge is that from what I've heard, and I think it's great that YVR provided the endowment to actually have a sustainable organization with staff. I think it comes down to resources on the island, and I know there's a direct linkage as a lot of the local governments have done their community plans that make reference to farmland and food security. But I think there's a missing link there as to that sounds good. It's, everybody's concerned about food security and farmland and the availability and maintaining agricultural producers. But there's a disconnect as to what does that mean and what are we doing about it? And if the local, with local governments identifying that's a key thing for a sustainable community, it seems that perhaps there's an opportunity with local government to provide, more resources to help sustain farming communities and have that food, actually fulfill that goal of having food security. And I think that applies right up and down the island. Most communities that we have properties in, all from Campbell River south or even further north, all identify food security as a big deal. And I think that's a direct link to where perhaps resources could come from to support something like Christine's Cotton Delta.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a question or a comment, or it's a bit of both, I guess, but it seems pretty obvious that the farmers are caught in they're at the collision point between the wildlife and the people. I mean, they're the ones that are in the middle of it all, because what they do, the wildlife need the farms and the people need the farms. And so I think we're all thinking about, well, how many swans are enough, and how many geese are enough, and how many elk are enough, and how many is too many. And we all want to know the answer to that, because then if we know how many swans we want and how many elk we want, then we can figure out how to feed them. But to me, the missing part of that, I just put this out there. I have no idea how we get the answer, and we probably can't get the answer. We can't figure that out. That's a moving target unless we know how many people are enough and how many people are too many, because we got to feed the people too, right? But nobody wants to go there, so I'm not very optimistic, I'm afraid. But I think that kind of summarizes the issue we're facing here.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Hi, my name's Linda Chu. I'm from the Cowichan Valley. I was wondering maybe we have a solution. I heard about the talks this morning that that the swans has been really improving, and that it's coming back. Okay, but theirs is a little bit of coming down also. When the graphs came up, it was coming down, but. You guys must have all read about the Silent Spring, right? When Rachel Carson said that DDT is killing off all the birds and all the insects and the land. Anybody haven't heard of Silent Spring? Yeah. So, recently in last year, the cancer research arm of the WHO said that glyphosate is carcinogen to human beings, right? And so I'm wondering if that's the answer, because we're feeding all these trumpeters on corn and on soil that has been sprayed with glyphosate. So maybe eventually they might come down. Their population might come down. Maybe that's the solution. I don't know. So I'm just wondering if the panel knows of any research that is being done that correlates the rise of glyphosate and the descent of the population of the swans of waterfowls.
Linda receives the Silver Lining Award for the discussion this evening.
To my knowledge, there's no disease issues that are limiting populations at that scale, unless something like the Zika virus came in and attacked swans. I mean, they're like they're adapted to organisms and disease, and they have their own immune systems and so forth. So it'd be pretty tough, I think, for something like that to regulate the population.
If you guys don't want to comment, I'll say that right now the populations are expanding rapidly. There's no, I don't know, there's been some local swan die-offs due to still lead poisoning, I gather, but waterfowl populations on the island here are very healthy and they're growing. I did have my actual question, or just a clarification from Graham, was you said that fence was paid for 50%. My understanding is that it was 50% for materials only.
Hello.
So maybe you could just elaborate on that a little for us farmers, Graham, because
Sure.
that was
Okay.
my understanding.
Yes, no, the mitigation program under the Ag Wildlife Program reimburses elk fencing or deer fencing at 50% of the total cost, not just 50% of the material cost. And
Which department or government would we be dealing with?
it's, yeah, it's you apply through me. So the provincial Ag Wildlife Compensation Program. Environmental Farm Plan does not offer fencing reimbursement anymore. Pardon?
The internal fencing.
Cross fencing?
Yeah. That's what they're offering.
Oh, are they? That's, yeah, I'm not aware of that one. And so perimeter fencing? No. So if it's perimeter fencing, you come to me, and apparently if it's cross fencing, you go to Environmental Farm Plan. And can I just elaborate on that? Elk fencing is not the solution to the problem. It just compounds the problem onto another farm or densifies wildlife population on a smaller land base. For the farmer's benefit, though, it does save his crop, and he doesn't have to source another replacement crop. And many of the farms aren't conducive to elk fencing of that nature for flooding reasons, creek reasons, gates, topography, cliffs, all of those things. But if you're interested in just fencing a portion of your farm that you're maybe going to grow your corn on a rotation, we will look at that too. It doesn't have to be on the whole farm scale for the program to go ahead.
Referring to the glyphosate issue, is the majority of the feeds given to dairy cattle GMO? No?
I defer to the dairy farmers in the crowd.
No, and the majority of the feed is not GMO feed, so I would just say maybe 30% if you're growing corn, but the rest, all the grass we grow is not GMO. But it's, well, I'm not going to get into that.
Okay, in Europe there's a change in the dairy industry, and there more and more of the crops are going to be demanded not to be the feed crops, not to be genetically modified. And, you know, that's bound to spread, so it's just something that's coming down the pipe. You know?
Okay.
Do you think, Graham, that there's an opportunity okay, so you have, and perhaps bear with me for a second while I ask for clarification, you have the work that you do in the Comox Valley, and then the work that the compensation program that you deliver across Vancouver Island. Is there an opportunity for a program like the one that you're involved with in the Comox Valley to come to the Cowichan Valley? What would need to happen? What would need to be put in place to make it possible?
Yes, I guess the work that we did in the early stages with the swans in the Comox Valley, we've implemented in the Comox Valley. We implement in the Cowichan Valley all over Vancouver Island. If the farmers are interested in dissuading wildlife populations, there's that resource is available to them. Specifically for cover crops reimbursement, at this point, the Ministry of Agriculture reimburses a portion of cover crops. Outside the valley, the Comox Valley, they provide $75 an acre. That's solely from the Ministry of Agriculture. And within the Comox Valley, they allow the Ducks Unlimited program to compensate $50 an acre, and then they top it up another $25 to make it $75 an acre. So in essence, cover crops are reimbursed all over Vancouver Island, either by Ducks Unlimited and the Ministry of Agriculture, or just the Ministry of Agriculture. So that side of it is looked after on the whole island at this point. But the whole message that I'm trying to portray is compensation isn't the solution. The farmers would rather have their crop than have to deal with me or the animals. Government funding is always at risk. Private funding is always at risk. So we need to research cropping methods, keep going with the variety changes for growing short season corn and all of those things. So when we're talking about the Swanscape and helping the viability of dairy farms, that's kind of where I see the effort going, is to make sure that we're staying at the forefront of agricultural production, whether it's the type of machines we're using, the type of crop principles we're using, and making it cost effective on our scale, not prairie scale. Prairie scale is different. Our scale is much smaller and our land prices are much higher. So the mathematical equation for a dairy farmer on Vancouver Island to stay afloat is different than in the prairies.
Any of our dairy farmers care to comment on that, or, oh, anyone else?
Hello, my name is Jenny James. I am a farmer in the West Home Chemainus area, and this is just directed to Derek. Thank you for coming tonight, and welcome to the Valley, and we hope that we'll actually see you coming out to our farms. A number of us have never seen anyone from the ministry come and talk to us or see what is going on, and so we're hoping that we'll see you out in the community as well. Thank you.
You will see me. You probably see me less than you hope, but hopefully, you know, and I don't know if I talked about the area that I cover, but I cover, this position used to be focused largely in the Cowichan Valley, but now I cover the Capital Regional District as well as the Gulf Islands. So I'm covering basically what was two positions. And so, which has its downsides because I'm spread over a larger area. So I'm focused more on sort of strategic opportunities and things of this nature. This is an issue that's across my area, across my territory. And so the kinds of approaches that can be done here, these are things that also would be of interest to people, to producers in the Capital Regional District. So working on things that can be applied across the area is something that I'll be focused on. But for the past couple of months, I've just been meeting various groups. I'm interested in meeting farmers directly to understand what the issues are so that we're in a better position to address those issues. So.
My name is Kerry Smith. I'm with the Trumpeter Swan Society. And if we were to put together a similar forum in the Skagit, Whatcom area, northern Washington, would you be willing to come out and help us and let us know what, pass on all the information you've been able to gain over the past 20 years?
I would certainly need to check with my board of directors, but we do intend to share the work that the trust has done, so send me an email.
So my name is Jay Gordon. I run the Washington State Dairy Federation, and I'll follow that up with an offer to come down. I'm also, up until the 1st of October, a dairy farmer. You'd hear similar stories in Washington. Couple of comments. One, an earlier question, why the dairy farms, and is there something we can do? After watching swans for 40 years on my place and geese on 40 years, you have to get into a little bit of biology. Dairy farms are attractive because of nitrogen. All the dairymen in the room will know we use an organic nitrogen source that breaks down slowly, and we grow 2 crops that cows like, and so do swans. Corn first, grass second. So you'll hear the same stories of the dairymen here on the island that you'll hear 120 miles south where I farm. Would love to have you guys come down in the Skagit. We have, you know, we wouldn't have a problem if you guys would just take care of it up here. And the way our guys refer to the taking care of the problem would be high-speed lead injection therapy. I guess that's a question. You brought up strategy. And I heard a little bit earlier today, you know, the Midwest is taking care of this via the treaties, and we sort of missed the ball and got dressed up for the ball a little bit late. At what point do we say enough is enough? We need to address the ability to have effective management in our hunting seasons, our bag limits, not be doing half measures. And this is a question that I can tell you from the southern half of, you know, this flyway, our guys are asking the same thing. And so, you know, I think at some point we're going to have to get real about this and say enough is enough. The Midwest has got some management tools that we don't have on the West Coast, and we need to address this because my guys are sick and tired of feeding this many birds. And my lesson going home tonight and tomorrow in the morning is you guys are too. So strategically, I think we need to take a look at this at some point and say enough's enough. Wouldn't you agree? There's my question.
One of the benefits of the compensation program for wildlife management is that we have now affixed a price to sustaining wildlife populations on farmland. So show me the set of hands that are from the Ministry of Environment or that other ministry responsible for all other things that are here that are responsible for managing wildlife populations on Vancouver Island. Any hands? None. So I get to go into their offices and say, we spent over $1 million compensating farmers on Vancouver Island for wildlife damage. What do you think about that? How does that affect what number you're putting on those animals that you're releasing in the situation of elk, moving elk from Sayward down to Cowichan? You know, that comes with some fiscal responsibility. You can't just pick a number and say, I'm going to move 30 elk from Sayward to Cowichan and not think about the consequences. And what if Plan B? What if they don't go up Mount Provo and they end up on the agricultural lands? There's got to be a Plan B. Oh, there was no Plan B. So now we can say $1 million. There should be a Plan B.
That's a little bit ironic saying to, you know, go to the Ministry of Environment, which is the most underfunded ministry in the provincial government, to contribute more money to the Ministry of Agriculture, which is the second most underfunded ministry. Perhaps we should stop at forest lands and natural resource operations. Anyway, I was wondering, Gary, we were talking a little bit, or the gentleman from Cowichan Valley was speaking a little bit about population dynamics in the Midwest versus the coastal populations. Is there anything that you'd like to say about that or could offer about that? And the difference in management practices or anybody else on the panel? Is it just...
Yeah, I assume we're talking about geese.
Yeah.
And,
Trumpeter swans? Geese? I don't know.
They're swans.
What's he talking about?
I assume you're talking about geese, Jay, right?
Geese.
Yeah, and you know, the mid-continental snow goose population has been growing exponentially, and the Fish and Wildlife Service through the flyway system has allowed extended harvest in spring seasons and 30 geese a day bag limits to try to, because they're doing some crop damage, but they're also doing a whole lot of damage to the ecosystem where they nest and causing impacts on eiders and other species that nest in the Arctic. And but even with all that harvest, they're not stopping the growth of those populations, is my understanding. And some people here, like Jim Dabowski in the back or John Cornelli, can speak more to that. But here in the Pacific Flyway, you have two populations, major populations of white geese, and well, three, counting the Ross geese. There's also Ross geese. They don't come much to this part of Washington much. You're lucky, because there's almost now more Ross geese than snow geese. But one population is mostly from the North Slope of Alaska, and the other group is from Wrangel Island in Russia. And the Wrangel Island birds have always been on the radar because the population's been fairly low at times, and so it's much more carefully managed and a little harder to get approval to reduce that flock. It's, you know, they breed in Russia. And did you guys back at the back want to say anything about that? They're really the flyway folks.
John Corneli with the Trumpeter Swan Society, a retired U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service regional migratory bird chief. And I can comment, and I was talking to Jay a little bit earlier, and we didn't get far enough in the discussion, but what Gary says is true. Greater snow geese in the Atlantic flyway and mid-continent snow and Ross geese went through an environmental assessment process, a long process, and they implemented these, for our careers, extraordinary seasons and bag limits, and allowed electronic calls and all kinds of other things that are not legal for most waterfowl hunting. And for a while, they seemed to be somewhat effective at reducing those populations. But more recently, they've started to climb back up, and they've started moving into other areas up in the Arctic and their breeding grounds. And as Gary said, they're affecting all kinds of other migratory birds. So those in the Pacific, the western populations of snow geese and Ross geese were not part of that. Their populations weren't doing the same thing at the time. And so that would be an option to look into, but the bad news is that it's really not working in the mid-continent and in the Atlantic flyway like we hoped it would. We got a lot more hunters out in the spring, and there are other issues like, the geese aren't that palatable at the time. They make good sausage, but there's only so much sausage we can eat. And there's a large segment of the population that were upset about those extraordinary methods that we were using as well, and you have to deal with that. So anyway, that's kind of the current status of what's happening. We haven't solved that problem in the rest of the continent.
Thank you very much for contributing that. I think we're in a position where we have really a blessing of expertise on the floor as well as at the head table. Are there any other questions from the floor before we wrap up? We actually have hit 10 o'clock, which I wasn't sure that we would. It's like the witching hour. We're all turning into pumpkins or trumpeter swans. Being a perpetual optimist and feeling something slightly akin to hopelessness or despair at the moment, I'd like to go through our panelists at the front and in parting words, if you could give us your thought on one thing that we can do to move this issue forward, or one reason for a hopeful resolution, what would that be? We'll start with Derek.
Well, I think conversations like this are helpful and useful, and the conversations that I've had with the folks in the Fish and Wildlife branch is that they didn't expect success, I don't think, when it came to elk transplantations or with the kinds of success that we're seeing around waterfowl. I think with regards to, my understanding is that we transplanted geese, Canada geese here. We introduced non-migratory geese. They've done exceptionally well. And we're also seeing the conservation measures associated with trumpeter swans, which were almost eliminated, and they're coming back. And, these are good news, but now it's like, so how do we turn our minds to their success? So how do we develop management strategies? How do we work together to address this? And I think that's, as a provincial employee, that's our challenge. How do we get together? How do we get our colleagues together so that we can address this in a meaningful way, so that we can appreciate the concerns that those that are being impacted by the success, largely the producers, but also to a certain extent municipalities and conservation, even now conservation organizations. How do we bring people together so that we can address this effectively given the limited resources that we have available to us? I'm an optimist too, and I'm hopeful because I think the conversation's changing. It's a question of whether or not we can respond quickly enough so that it's meaningful, so that that folks that are here, that are being impacted, feel like they're being listened to.
I agree. I think communication is a really strong point on this, and making sure that the people in the room are the people that you should be communicating with. There's lots of 1-800 numbers to report damage or poachers or said things. But I think if farmers are having trouble with elk, the elk biologists need to be in the room, and we need to discuss what those issues are and what management tools we have in front of us to effectively manage our problem. And if we document those methods that are being put forward as what we should be doing as farmers, then when they fail, we have a track record of, we've done what you've recommended we do, now what? And you come up with a solution together to go to the next level. And that goes for all wildlife species and includes naturalists, because there's a public element for viewing. I mean, just because a farmer doesn't want X number of elk doesn't mean there's a public component that should be ignored if they do want said number of elk. So having all the groups at the table on a regular basis, and so everybody has all the same information from the starting point. And then, so when somebody sells goose cull, it's not a shock. It's like, this has been coming for a while, and these are the reasons that we're talking about a goose cull. So I think documenting what we've done in the past, why we've done it, and where we need to go, and why we need to get there, I think is a really good system to enact change.
Well, my presentation was kind of a come to Jesus call to work on this dairy issue to keep our swans. And what I would like to see is some volunteers, hopefully some people on this panel and others here in the audience who have a lot of knowledge and expertise that would like to get a committee together to kind of start brainstorming and moving forward on working on this issue, because as I said before, I think it's very urgent. And the more we wait, the more we're going to lose, and we don't have time. So anyway, if any of you would like to participate, just send a note on our webpage. It's just ttss@swansociety.org, and we'll put together a list and maybe set up a little network and figure out a conference call and maybe figure out a meeting in the future and start moving forward. So that's what I'd like to see. Thanks.
What everybody else said. I think from the organizations I work with, from our mandate being fish and wildlife conservation, I'm an internal optimist as well, and I think looking at and dealing with some of these issues, for me, one of the biggest things is it's not farmers versus wildlife, it's not naturalists versus hunters, it's more of a discussion that's a community discussion about underlying values of, we want an agricultural community, we want food security, we want wildlife. And it seems to be a discussion that needs to start from what are the common values. And, to be honest, the farmers we all work with are all dairy farmers. And so it is, the dairy farms do support the lands that we actually have acquired. And they're the guys that are working our lands to support their farms. And we recognize that those farms provide local jobs. It's locally produced, product for the local community. And I think it's a discussion that has to start based on a common set of values of what, as a society, what do we value? And I do believe that's possible with discussions like this.
I think one of the keys to successfully implementing our organization in Delta is the fact that farmers were involved on the ground floor. This was not a top-down initiative telling farmers what they should and shouldn't do. This was farmers coming together directly, as mentioned, with conservation professionals, communicating the issues, and farmers themselves sitting on our board with the rest of the farming community, coming up with innovative solutions. And that still is taking place today. We've got a dairy farmer on our board, we have a beef producer on our board, we've got a vegetable producer on our board, and there's very active discussions that take place about how we can adapt our programs to keep addressing challenges to agriculture and wildlife. And I think agricultural producers are the cornerstone of that success. And I know we've heard a lot about that tonight. How do we support agricultural viability? Farmers need to be involved at the very ground floor because often they're the ones that are the most experienced in coming up with very creative solutions on the farm.
Well, I would like to see the Ministry of Environment. Apparently there's 3 groups that deal with the number of wildlife litter we have, and I would just like to see them all get together and talk to each other and provide a proper plan instead of one's talking, not even talking to the other. So they don't seem to talk to each other, which seems a common problem, but anyway, that's what I'd like to see.
Thank you. So thank you to all of our panelists this evening. Some of you have traveled from afar to join us, and all of you have given generously of your time preparing and sitting with us this evening to share your expertise. Thank you to everyone in the audience who has offered their perspective and their wisdom and their questions, their ears and their open hearts to this conversations. Thank you to our special funding partners for this particular session, the Investment Agriculture Foundation of British Columbia, with funding from the governments of British Columbia and Canada, as well as all of the other conference sponsors. And I wish you all the very best and a safe and wonderful evening. Thank you.